Hello, everyone, and welcome. Can you believe it's February? So thank you for joining the Friends of San Pedro Valley Park. I'm Mila Stroganov, Programs Director and Field Trips Director for the Friends, and this is the Norm, your host tonight. Heidi Perryman has agreed to join us tonight to enlighten us on the subject of beavers and their current status. I'm thrilled that she is with us, and this will prove to be a fascinating program. Moving on, at the end of tonight's lecture, we will have a Q&A session and we'll take some questions and read some comments. And yes, I'm very pleased to announce that today's lecture will be recorded and posted to our website in a week or two. And our website, if you have friends or if you yourself wish to listen to the lecture again, you can go to our website, which is friendsofsanpedrovalleypark.org. Go to that, listen to it, enjoy it, tell your friends about it, consider becoming a member and supporting the programming. A heads up to all of you, on Saturday, March 2nd at 7 p.m., we'll have J.R. Blair, who will present a lecture on pollination, seeds, and fruits. And we owe so much of our food production to pollination. So just think what we would do without it, not to mention what all the birds, insects, butterflies, and rodents would do. So, mark your calendars. It should be a great lecture. And you know J.R. Blair very well. He's our mycologist. He does our nature walks in the park. He's presented some wonderful lectures himself. So he's back, ready to give another one. And then we have we actually have a double header in March. Dr. Carlos Davidson will join us on March 23rd at 7 p.m. with a lecture on amphibians. And we haven't heard about amphibians in a good little while. So take the opportunity to listen and we'll find out what their plight is in today's world. We will also hear about salamanders, possibly frogs and toads that reside in San Pedro Valley Park. And now about our speaker this evening. Heidi Perryman is a child psychologist who became a beaver advocate when she started filming beavers that showed up in her hometown in 2006. The hometown we're talking about is Martinez, just across the bay. She started the organization Worth a Dam to advocate for their safety and educate others about their value in the watershed. She organized the first Beaver Festival in 2008, an annual event, which has become one of the largest nature festivals in Northern California. She does and continues to advocate for beavers, and tonight she'll be doing that by educating us about the beaver. Just think, in Pacifica, we live in a watershed and have a creek with several tributaries. And no beavers at present, but who knows? Maybe we will find out whether they actually even were here at some point. Maybe Heidi might tell us. So, Heidi, please take it away.
Wow, great reading of an intro there. And I'm really happy to be here today. I'm just trying to make my clock start timing me so I don't talk too much. I think that this is a great time to be talking about beavers in California in particular, because California is undergoing a renaissance in its thinking about beavers. And that really is important. It's a long time coming. When I got involved 20 almost years ago, I was sure it was going to come any minute, but I waited and waited and waited. So we think it's long overdue. Now, if you can imagine, back before the fur trade wiped out beavers all across the United States and Canada and Europe, there was at one time a beaver in every river, brook, and rill. That's what Samuel de Champlain saw when he came in the 1600s and explored the Adirondacks. California, all across America, it was much wetter. There were boggy meadows everywhere. The streams were marshy and didn't dry out. We didn't really have any ephemeral streams back in the day. And there were estimated between 60 and 400 million beaver in North America. That is a beaver per every 1 to 3 kilometers of stream. They were everywhere. And we probably at that time didn't ever think we'd run out of them. Kind of like fossil fuels, you can take them, you can trap them, there will always be more. And if in fact there aren't always more, well, we better get ours first. So beavers were trapped out for their fur and for their castoreum glands. First in Europe, they disappeared in about the 1500s. King Henry VIII was one of the last monarchs to get a felted beaver hat. We used their underfur for felt. And after we ran out of beavers there, we went looking for beavers in other places. We were very happy to find them in Canada, and that really drove the exploration of that nation. It really drove the exploration of America. In fact, a lot of pilgrims paid for their passage across the seas by being able to trap beaver. This was like a $5 bill floating around, and you could just pick it up. Well, not $5 then, but you can imagine. And at the time, beaver adults were trapped. So beaver young were not even used for their fur, they were just burned. So we wiped out the beaver population all the way in the East Coast, all the way in the Midwest, all the way to the West Coast. In fact, before we got to the West Coast, in the 1700s, the Russians came around the bottom of the Americas and came up the West Coast and probably trapped out every single stream of fur bearers in the 1700s. So we had an endless cycle of harvesting beavers, and natives traded trinkets for beaver pelts. This was a real land war of global economy. We had the English coming down from Canada. We had the Germans coming down from the middle of America. We had the French coming up from Louisiana. And in fact, when Hudson Bay Company came down in California, they said they wanted to create a fur desert. So that when the other people from other countries got there, they'd think all the animals were trapped out and they'd just give up and go away. So this was a global war, just like the hunt for oil now, and with pretty similar consequences in that we entirely changed our landscape. And I don't think we think about it or talk about it as a devastating ecological disaster, but it was. So when we trapped out those beavers, there wasn't anyone left to maintain the dams. The dams washed out, the water washed out, the resilience to drought completely changed, the water table completely changed, and our wildlife probably completely changed. Although there weren't a lot of people able to comment on that at the time. Now, the reason I say the water table changed is because these beaver dams, they're pressing down on the water, and water is saturating both banks, and it's also seeping down to the lower parts and pushing water up through that through that dam, below that dam. This constantly creates a cooling draft that helps our fish, this hyperheic exchange. So the weight of the water changes the aquifer. And in California, we've had water tables completely disappear. There are places in California that are a foot lower than they used to be because of the collapse of that water table. And all of this used to be different when beavers were maintaining their ponds. Now, in 1840 to 1860, California had a significant drought. And it's probably not an accident that that is about the time we wiped out beaver in California, because we used to be able to be more resilient to these drought periods because of beaver ponds. We have great research that shows that beaver ponds, even during drought, maintain wetlands more than 9 times more water than equivalent areas without beaver ponds. And that research comes from Glennis Hood in Canada. So we really were very devastated by these 20 years of drought. And I'm sure people were praying for Wayne in 1860. And in 1861, they got their wish, but it was not, it was kind of a monkey paw of a wish. It flooded. They had a very early snow in November, and that early snow melted very fast, and all the streams and all the rivers in California saturated from that snow melt, and then it rained straight for 43 days in California. And you have to remember, at this time, we had only been a state for 9 or 10 years. It almost wiped us out. This stream had no place to go. The entire interior of California was basically an inland sea from Redding to Sacramento. And in some parts of this inland sea were 65 miles across. It is estimated that about a quarter of the properties in California, taxable properties, were washed away, were lost in that flood. About 1 in every 8 homes was lost. In fact, we almost went bankrupt for a year and a half. State employees did not even receive a salary. And the governor of California at that time had to be sworn in by boat, by getting to his little government Capitol building in Sacramento at the time. So this flooding really devastated California, and I'm sure nobody at that time thought to themselves, my goodness, beavers make a lot of difference to drought, and they sure make a lot of difference to flooding. We have research now that says that beavers are like speed bumps. Beaver dams create speed bumps that slow the water down in these small tributaries and these small streams. And if you multiply that by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of streams across the state, we would have seen something very different. So this drought didn't extend just to California, it extended to Oregon and Washington and parts of Utah and Nevada as well. This flooding. It really was a devastation for all of the West Coast. And again, as we are entering these dire straits of climate change, we're beginning to think about the things that make us more resilient to climate change. And one of those things is beavers. Now, beavers have a lot of specialized adaptations for their life in the water. Even though they breathe air like you and I, they have specialized equipment They're sort of little miniature submarines that they can make their life in the water. They have ear flaps that close. They have nostrils that close like a seal. They even have a second valve behind their mouth that they could close when they're swimming, like with a stick in their mouth, so they don't get water down their throat. Their thick fur keeps them dry and comfortable, but it's not waterproof and it has to be constantly treated with oil from their castor glands. So what we wanted wasn't the thick outer fur, it was the inner fur that that was waterproof that we used as felt for hats. We also wanted those castor glands because they were sold as medicine and as treatment for pregnancy and erection deficits and all kinds of things. We were using those. So beavers really were used in all kinds of ways, but they were taken for granted for what they most were excelling at. Beavers can swim entirely with their back feet, which are webbed like a duck's. Their front paws are grasping like a raccoon. They can hold their breath for 15 minutes under the water. And again, it is not hard to see how they are able to create these enormous adaptations to life. Now, we call beavers rodents, and they are rodents. Their teeth grow throughout their entire life, but they're not any kind of rodent we ever met before. Both parents raise the kids, parents mate for life. A beaver can only get pregnant once a year, and a beaver kit stays with its parents for 2 or 3 years while it's learning all the things it needs to know to be an adult. And then it has to disperse, go off and seek its fortune some 2 miles away. So we really misunderstand what beavers have going on when we call them rodents. Kits are born fully furred. Their eyes are open. They can swim for birth. What they can't do is dive because they're like little fat corks. And so when they're in the water, they just float. Now, people were very used to the devastation of the fur trade. I think we did not miss all the beavers that were gone. We certainly liked all our farm fields and we liked our levees very much. Thank you. And we didn't expect beavers to show up on the landscape, but they did. And one of the first places they did was my town, which is Martinez, California. They showed up in our creek, Alhambra Creek, in 2007, and they built a dam and a lodge in that creek. And the city was concerned about the particular location of this dam because this creek historically had flooded a lot. It flows right from the Carquinez Strait all the way across Main Street and up through town. And so they got a permit pretty quickly to depredate or kill these beavers. But as you can see, people were pretty interested in the beavers. They would gather at the bridges, but all the children on the way to school, they could all see these beavers, all the lawyers on the way to the courtroom, everybody looking for a place to park. People got pretty engaged with them because it's not every day you see a beaver in your creek. So this really became a bit of a social conundrum for the city. And people didn't like the idea that these beavers were going to be killed. These photographs were all taken in our creek of our beavers by Cheryl Reynolds, who's the vice president of Wortha Dam. And that one in the upper left-hand corner has been the #1 beaver photo on Wikipedia since 2008 when she took it. So it's really amazing because beavers let you see a lot of their lives. They're extremely social animals. They really do a lot of engaging. This is what got me involved. I started filming them because I thought they were so amazing. And that's been really interesting to see unfold. And obviously, it had a huge impact on the community of Martinez. Um, the other thing that happens is that when beavers come in and they build their dams, these dams trap sediment and organic material, and this organic material gets broken down by little microinvertebrates, and they get eaten by bigger bugs, and the bigger bugs get eaten by little fish, and the little fish get eaten by bigger fish, and the bigger fish get eaten by birds and otters and mink. And we saw a dynamic effect in our creek almost immediately when the beavers came. We'd never had kingfisher in the creek. All of a sudden we do. We never had green heron in the creek. All of a sudden we did. We had hooded merganser. We had more visits from river otters. We hadn't seen mink in Alhambra Creek for 35 years, and then they turned up. So these dynamic changes all happened when the beavers came. And that also created a stir among the people in Martinez when they imagined that now we're going to have a city that is going to kill these animals that are doing so much good. So people started talking to their neighbors, they started talking to their friends, they started talking to the media, and at one point we were in all the local papers, in all the state papers, and we were even on national news. There was going to be a big meeting forcing the city to discuss the fate of these beavers. And so many people were expected for that meeting, November 7th, 2007, that it couldn't be held in City Hall chambers. It had to be held in the performing arts for the high school. And this meeting was an amazing meeting. People think I made that meeting. I did not. That meeting made me. There were people from the Sierra Club there. The Humane Society was there. The superintendent of schools said he would plant trees to to take care of the beavers. He would pay for students to have funding to study this. Um, it was an amazing meeting. I sometimes describe that meeting as a weird combination of the last 5 minutes of It's a Wonderful Life mixed with Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, because it was that good. And the city council sitting there looked like deer in headlights, and they did what city councils often end up doing, which is appointing a subcommittee to study the issue further. And for some silly reason, they let me be on that subcommittee. And we had 90 days to outline the pros and cons of living with beaver in an urban setting. This had never been done in a well-known city before. This had never been done in California before, but we thought maybe we can do it. So the first thing we did was to hire this gentleman. This is Skip Lyle. He's the inventor of the beaver deceiver, and he came out from Vermont and he put in a flow device at the dam. Now, this basically works by moving the water from upstream to downstream, and it does it in such a way that the water loss gets disguised from the beavers. That little part that looks like a cage is not a cage for the beavers, it's a cage for the pipe, because if it wasn't there, the beavers would plug that pipe. This was installed in the very first days of 2008, and after that time, nobody ever worried about flooding again in Martinez from the beavers. This entirely solved our problem, even though maybe no one really believed it would. When we called up Fish and Game and said, we learned about these really cool things and we're going to put one in. What do you think of that? And they said, without a question, every single time, those things never work. That'll never work. So this was the first time it had ever been done, and the first time that we were able to prove firsthand that it could be done. Our beavers let us learn a lot about their lives, and as we watched them, we could see that beavers were monomorphs. You couldn't tell mom and dad apart. Um, the females and the males looked the same, except for when the female's breastfeeding, and then she has visible teats. So when mom had visible teats, we were able to notice that she happened to have a distinctive little mark in her tail, and that was important because every time the community saw that tail, we knew it was mom, and that was really how we followed the family tree and got the cast of characters during the time that they grew and changed. Now, during the time the beavers lived with us in Martinez, we had 27 kids born in Martinez. And you might be thinking, oh my God, 27 beavers. What did they do with all those animals? But it's important to remember that beavers stay with their parents for 2 or 3 years, then they disperse. They go off to seek their fortune and they find their habitat somewhere else. Has to be at least 2 miles away. So our population never got bigger than 7, and beavers are showing up all over the Bay Area, probably because of us. So I'm happy about that. So we have beavers in Fairfield, we have beavers in Nampa, beavers in Sonoma, beavers showed up recently in Pleasant Hill and Walnut Creek. I'm sure you heard about the beavers that were on the news in Palo Alto, although those probably aren't descendants of the Martinez beavers. So our goal at Worth a Dam was to educate and engage the public and to keep this issue in the public eye and to keep the pressure on the city council. Unfortunately, the city council never decided that the beaver should be in Martinez. They never took a vote saying, we think this is a great idea to have beavers. So we thought maybe they wouldn't be so safe when all the public attention died down. So we thought the beavers might be safer if we threw a party for them. So we held the first Beaver Festival in 2008, and it turned out to be really great. We invited all the wildlife groups in Contra Costa at the time. We had children's activities, live music, and beaver tours and education. And that turned out to be so much fun. We've done it every year since then. It has grown dramatically, and this year is going to be our 15th Beaver Festival. If you've never gone to a Beaver Festival, you definitely should come check it out. It's the last Saturday in June, and we love to be able to teach how and why to live with beavers and to really engage the public about this, the importance of these animals on the ecosystem. We have a great artist that works with us from Napa now. She's a chalk artist, and she does a huge beaver mural in the middle of town, which is really fantastic. So one of the activities that we do is that we try to use a teaching measure that will help children learn about how beavers help creeks. That's really useful because that if you teach children something, then you're actually teaching adults something, and that is helpful because media thinks children learning things are cute and they take pictures of it, and that is really persuasive to the city council to continue to do the right thing. So it all kind of works together. So one of the activities I created was the Keystone Species Charm Bracelet, where kids could earn, like, for example, their otter charm from the otter group, and then they could put that on their bracelet by learning how beavers help otters by creating more fish. And they could take this bracelet with them to remember and to teach others. And so these kinds of activities are really engaging and really helpful. On a cheaper level, we could do something simple like draw a creek with a beaver dam and then enlist kids to draw all the wildlife species that use that creek and inhabit that beaver dam. And that's really great because then you have this teaching tool you can use to share with others. This is one of the wonderful beaver habitats that has grown since our family. This is Fairfield. This is the Laurel Creek beavers. You can see that beaver lodge right in the middle of the creek, right next to all those track houses, right next to the trails in the middle of town. It is really a great way to involve kids. They do teaching walks with the students and parents, and it really is a dynamic habitat. And I honestly think every kindergarten should know where the nearest beaver dam to their school is, because it is such a great teaching tool. Now, this year, there was a lot of news about the female beaver found in Palo Alto. Unfortunately, she was picked up by animal control and brought to rehab where she died. We don't yet know what she died from. They brought the body to UC Davis for necropsy, but we haven't heard yet what the results of that was. In our experience in Worth the Dam, and we did over the years have a couple beavers die, we found that when they were taken to animal control, by the time they were sick enough to be picked up, they were probably not long for the world. So we don't know about that beaver, but we do know that beavers do find new partners. So our first female died. She broke a tooth, and she sustained a lot of infections through that break. And then she died, and she had 3 young kits in 2010. And the dad, Beaver, went back and found a 2-year-old to come help raise the family. And then he got married again. He found a new mate. And this was really amazing to be able to watch the family respond and grow and change over time. So we had 4 kits with that, well, 2 sets of kits with that first female and 3 sets of kids with the second female. I like to talk about the tools that can be used to solve beaver issues. What we used basically in Martinez was the flexible pond leveler. And basically this goes under the water, that it moves the water from upstream to downstream, and it does it in such a way that the water loss is disguised from the beavers, and that beavers don't have access to the pipe. Actually, what Skip Lyle invented was the beaver deceiver, which is actually more common for fixing problems with culverts. That's the #1 problem beavers cause, besides chewing people's trees. And this beaver deceiver basically uses a trapezoidal fence to force the beavers to have to dam more. If you think about it from a beaver's point of view, it would a little tiny dam across a culvert will give them a whole big pond, even though it's not much work. So the beaver deceiver is very well researched and very well understood. It's about 98% effective. And in fact, in some parts of Vermont, beaver deceivers are installed when new culverts are installed. So they could be part of the way we manage our roads in California if we were smart enough. Unfortunately, from my point of view, most of California does not respond to beaver issues by installing a flow device or a beaver deceiver. They respond to beaver issues the same way Martinez decided to, which is to pick up the phone and call Fish and Game and say, I got a beaver I don't want anymore, and can I have a permit to kill it? This is called a depredation permit. It's called depredation because you're depredating yourself. The beaver is considered a predator because it's eating the things on your land or because it's doing things you don't want and you're getting rid of it. Now, these depredation permits are issued in California every year and they are not public, though we do not know their record. They're not reported. There is a portion of them that are issued to USDA, and those are reported, but the vast number of them is private. So the only way you have access to them is through a public records request. And for the last 10 years, Worth the Dam has decided it's very important to have access to that data. And so we have done a public records request to get that information. What we found is that beaver permits are issued there's about 150 depredation permits issued every year in California. And those 150 permits are good for a take of about 3,000 beavers, which is pretty stunning when you think about all the differences they could make in California to water storage and wildlife. We see that there are really differences in the way different counties respond to them. And we've also been able to see over the years that there are some counties where beavers don't even show up at all, like your county, for example. And that's probably because the population has not yet returned to those areas. So one of the hottest counties that is the most intolerant of beavers over the years for 10 years has been Placer County. So I'm really hopeful that we can get a little more thinking in their direction. One of the problems that trapping is easy, but doesn't work. As the beaver population is rebounding across California, what we see is that when you take beaver out of adequate habitat, what you're basically doing is putting a vacancy sign on that habitat, and a new beaver just moves in. Whereas if you install a flood device and that beaver sticks around, he will use his naturally territorial behaviors to keep other beavers away and other families away. And that's what happened in Martinez. We had other beavers come check out the area, but they left pretty quickly when our beavers said, oh, we're already here. This one's taken. Um, so we'd like to see that people really thinking about the help that beavers could create. What we know is that there has been a body of work for the last 40 years that beavers have a huge effect on salmonids. In fact, juvenile salmonids growing up in beaver ponds are much better off than juvenile salmonids without them. And the reason for that is because these ponds are places where they can get fat, where they don't dry out, where they don't freeze solid. And the fatter you get when you're a baby salmon, the safer you are when you go to sea. And the reason for that is because more things fit in your mouth and you fit in fewer mouths. So people sometimes ask, well, what do they do? All these beavers, don't they make dams that make it hard for salmon to get over? But you have to remember that these two species co-evolved. They really spent a lot of time figuring each other out. So salmon will pass during high flows, they'll pass during side channels. There are even chum salmon that will just bam straight into the dam. So typically what we see is that they manage it just fine. Um, Not only salmon, but trout also are really important. I find beavers really important. Trout require very cool streams. And again, beaver dams create this hyperhelic exchange that pushes water up from the water table, which is much colder than the rest of the water in a stream, because obviously if it's underground, it's never been exposed to the sun. So we see that beaver populations really change the success of both salmon and trout. How do these flow devices work? Well, they worked in Martinez for 9.5 years, almost 10 years. This completely controlled our flooding while the beaver stayed with us. And we also have some great research from both Canada and America about these being effective, but also being cost saving. So if you think about it and you're hiring a backhoe to rip out the beaver dam in a culvert a couple times a year, that gets extremely expensive. Whereas if you can install a flow device properly and solve the problem for the next decade, that really saves your bacon. We were very happy to be approached by Ranger Rick magazine, who wanted to do a story about the Martinez beavers, and we were thrilled because I wanted people all across the United States to know how and why to live with beavers and to show off what we learned. So Susie Esterhaus came and took some great photographs of beavers, and we got to be in Ranger Rick in 2017, and that was really fun as well. Now, I like to talk a lot about how and why to live with beavers. And one of my favorite tools to do that is to show this photograph. These are all photos taken by Cheryl Reynolds in Alhambra Creek. They were all animals that we hadn't seen before that came with the beaver habitat. So the green heron we never used to have in residence. The otter we very rarely saw. The hooded merganser turned out to be something we see now every winter in Downtown Creek. And again, the mink, some of us had never seen mink in Alhambra Creek before. Old timers, it probably had been 40 years since they had. So again, these species really benefit from the habitat created by the beavers, tended by the beavers, and allowed by the beavers. I was ready to go all across California preaching the beaver gospel. I'm going to take a sip of water right now. But before I could do that, I had to deal with a 100-year-old mistake. And that mistake really had to do with where beavers belong in California. And it really starts with this gentleman. This here is Joseph Cornell. He was the first director of vertebrate zoology at UC Berkeley. And he wrote a pair of volumes in the 1930s talking about the fur-bearing mammals of California. And of California, he said there were beavers in the Sacramento Delta, and there weren't very many beavers in the Sierras. They weren't over 1,000 feet in the Sierras, and they were nowhere in the coastal rivers, and they were a little bit in the north, but that's about it. California didn't have very many beavers. And that was really what California believed, or pretended to believe, for 100 years. So when beavers were swim into the Sierras, they would get trapped out because they were not native. And Fish and Game actually reported them as not native back 40 years ago. So that didn't make sense to me because beavers exist to 10,000 feet in the Colorado Rockies, and they exist on both sides of the Grand Canyon, and they exist all the way down to the Sonora River in Mexico. So why couldn't they manage California's bumpy little hills? And I was really happy to encounter an archaeologist from the Bureau of Land Management. That was Chuck James, and he had come across a paleo beaver dam during a dig in the eastern Sierras, and he knew enough about this brouhaha to carbon test the wood from that dam because he wanted to find out himself. What he found was that the oldest parts of the dam, the lowest parts of the dam, were continuously rebuilt with wood from 580 AD. And that dam was continuously built up until about 1850, which is when the beavers were pretty much wiped out in California. And that really gave us the platform we needed to go back and re-examine the literature, re-examine the data, look at trapping records, look at historical reports, look at native lore and ethnobotany, and really look at place names and think about the the fossil record that was found in California. When you think about it, you have to remember California settled really late, and in the 1900s we have a massive earthquake that wipes out all of our museum exhibits. So we lose a lot of our record. But what we found was that there was ample evidence to show that beaver were all the way across California from one end to the other, except for maybe the Mojave Desert. But during wet years, they probably got there as well. And that was totally making sense. It wouldn't make sense for beavers to be everywhere in America and in Canada and just not in California. That hardly explains itself. So we were able to publish 3 papers in the Journal of Fish and Game, and those papers all appeared in 2012 and 2013. At that point, we were able to show that beavers belong here, and Fish and Game pretty much gave up the ghost and stopped saying they weren't native. And that was really important because that allowed the foundation for everything that is happening now, which is great. So there has been some dynamic research in the last 5 years about really essentially that beaver dams are very valuable for fire resilience. And what we know from the research of Dr. Fairfax is that beaver ponds are 3 times more resistant to equivalent habitat without beavers. And the reason for that is because this soil, these underground ponds and underwater table streams are saturating the roots of plants. And so when the flames come and they try to ignite, the plant can resist. And that means that these fires start more slowly. And that was really probably what got the attention of California. And when we had such a very bad fire year, we probably thought, well, maybe if nothing else can help us, maybe we'll rethink our thoughts about beavers. There's very dynamic research about beavers and amphibians. I'm sure your amphibian person will talk to you guys about that. We know that as amphibians get more affected by climate change and extreme temperatures, some of the only places they do well is in beaver habitat. Some of the only things that we can do for salmon is improve our beaver habitat. We actually see that there was a great paper published just last year in Poland that said that beaver habitat changed the population of birds some 50 miles away from the dams. So these are really important animals that make a huge difference to our biodiversity at a time when our biodiversity is really taking a hard hit. And we should be thinking about these not as a problem, but as a solution. We think about changing a tire in a car. We would never throw away the car because it got a flat tire, but we don't think that way about beaver issues. We don't think about them as a simple solution that we have to find so that we can allow that animal to stick around and benefit us so extraordinarily. Well, I really wanted to get this message across to California, who wasn't really listening. And during COVID, I thought, well, we can't have a beaver festival, so we'll have a virtual beaver summit. We'll talk about beavers. And I maybe can't get people to show up in person, but I could probably get them to come virtually. So we were able to work with Sonoma State to produce the first California Beaver Summit. It was 2 days. It was some of the best scientists all over California. We had an enrollment of about 1,000 people, and a third of them were state employees. It was really dynamic. And after that meeting, that was when Gavin Newsom announced that, oh, I think it'll be a really good idea to create a beaver restoration team. So we're very happy about that. And the beaver restoration team has a couple goals. One of them is to begin beaver relocation, and the other is to change their policies on depredation. And a more important one is to educate the public about the value of beavers and why it's a good idea to keep them on the landscape. So I'm very happy about that. Now, just a couple days before I was putting this together, Google announced that it's working with Dr. Fairfax and Dr. Wheaton to identify beaver habitat using satellite imagery, which is important because nobody in America has been counting beaver population for certainly for 200 years. And we need to know where they are and where they're missing so that we can use their skills to help us be resilient to climate change. So this Google tool is going to use neural network imaging to create a thing that can teach itself to find beaver habitat. And the first place we're going to use it is in California. It's going to be this year. So we will have a brand new assessment of beaver population in California, and I'm very excited about that. So I think that the most important job of us is to deal with beaver education. And that is what I have really enjoyed about Worth a Dam and what I find most helpful as we go forward. And I thought I would just play you a little clip of what we've been able to see our children have learned over the years.
How do beavers help?
They build their dams and help reduce flooding.
They build dams and that helps reduce fires.
They help by providing lots of home for animals.
Well, they build dams by cutting down trees, and I think that helps preserve the water.
They help make wetlands.
They save salmon. They help frogs. They make the water higher. They reduce fires and help frogs. They build dams.
They help otters. They reduce droughts.
They help control the water level.
Beavers cut down trees to make less fires.
They help frogs.
Beavers help by making water making more water by building a dam.
They help water below and above the land.
So, I'm Heidi Perryman. I definitely think the Martinez beavers are worth a damn, And I certainly think that California needs to embrace the fact that beavers are worth a damn too. I'm happy to answer any questions or clarify anything that wasn't clear enough. Thank you.
Heidi, Heidi, that was absolutely fantastic. So well presented, so easily understood that,
Oh.
you know, so easily followed. So thank you tremendously. One doesn't have to be complicated in order to get a point across, does one? So thank you ever so much. That was absolutely fantastic. Let me just quickly go to the Q&A. So Susan is asking about Palo Alto. She says, if the creeks near Palo Alto are lined with concrete, do you think beavers can successfully make a dam and create a new, healthier ecosystem, or is the concrete terminal?
I think that I happen to have been in a conversation with both Bill and Rick Landman about this issue over the last few months, and I think that you have one creek in Palo Alto that is not entirely concrete lined, and that's Matadero Creek, right? And I think that beavers will need to burrow into the banks. That'll be the most important problem for them. They certainly can build dams, and I certainly think they can build dams without worrying about the concrete. That's not a problem for them, but they will need a place to live. And I'd be very surprised if they can't figure out a safe place.
Can they somehow do it on the side? I mean, if you have a whole heap of concrete, is it possible to somehow divert the water and create?
It's possible. I've also seen beavers use concrete, like even manhole covers to live in. So I don't know what they'll figure out, but I can't imagine that there can't be some space that a beaver could find that it could be able to build some kind of lodge.
Hmm,
Remember, beavers don't live in the dam. They live in a lodge. So they're separate.
hmm. So the dam is one thing, the fact that they
In
build a
fact,
dam to cover over a creek or a stream, but they live, then they build their own home somewhere else.
they build their home somewhere else. Yes. In fact, years ago, I was in communication with someone who was watching the beavers in Guadalupe River. And this was when there was such significant drought that the upper portions of that river were completely dry. And there was a beaver that had moved in to an area that was just a little pipe that was sticking out that had a drip in it, and it had built a dam in front of this drip such that the little pipe was one of the only places where there was water, and the beaver was sleeping next to the pipe in the brush and then using the pipe to swim in. And that beaver was just sitting there thinking, well, that this is going slowly, but it'll work eventually, I guess. So eventually that beaver moved on, but beavers are very clever. They'll figure out a way.
Hmm. That is slow. Drip, 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 right?
Yeah, right.
Did you give the organization the name Worth a Dam?
That was me.
Ah, yeah, that's great. Yes, love it. And Mary is asking whether Worth a Dam have an electronic newsletter that we can subscribe to.
Oh, well, Worth a Damn doesn't have a newsletter, but we do have a website. And I definitely would make that website in your life. We have reported on beaver news around the country, around California, and around Martinez every day for 17 years, and we're one of the only places that has an accurate report on the beaver beat. And so I definitely would check it out. You can also find out if there's any news, or if you email me, I'll tell you if there's anything important happening, and I can add you to our mailing list.
Mm-hmm. And your email or the
Oh,
organization?
I'm sorry. Yeah, if you go to martinezbeavers.org is the website, and you can send an email directly to me, and I'll know it.
Okay. Martinezbeavers.org.
Correct.
Okay.
Or Worth the Dam. Either way, and we'll get you there.
Okay. So folks, here, that's where that's go to that site, martinezbeavers.org, send an email to Heidi and she'll respond. Barbara Klinger is asking, I'm surprised, she says, to hear that mink have come to your creek. I thought mink were native to California. Can you elaborate a little about that?
Oh, mink are native to
Mm.
California. It's just that, remember, we're a refinery town. Our creek was not a lovely place for mink to be. And so it was a step. I mean, it used to be 100 years ago that Italian fishermen made their living off that creek, but not anymore. That was it was a hard place for a mink to be, and it turned out to be a great place for a mink to be.
Mm. So Susan says, amazing, so interesting. Thank you so much. And Bevan says, that was wonderful. Go Beavers.
Oh,
So,
good. That's what I want to hear.
and then Laura is asking whether if a watershed is interested in reintroducing beavers, what do they do to get started with CDFW, assuming a willing and large enough landowner with low gradient streams?
That is a really great question. I would say that it is a very good idea to put your wishes in to CDFW. They are not this is not happening fast. They did 2 releases into Maidu habitat, so this is a very, very slow process. But the best bet you have for having beaver in your habitat is to educate everyone around you so that when beavers show up, because they're going to, they don't kill them. So the best person to reintroduce a beaver is a beaver. But because reintroduction is very expensive, it's very costly, and it doesn't always work. It's a gift, even from the wise to the wise, that doesn't always work. So the best bet is to coexist with the beavers we got.
Mm. And Robert Case is wondering, how does one mitigate the loss of trees on private and public areas near the dams and feeding channels?
That's a great question. Okay, so here's how we did it in Martinez. We had every year we worked with the watershed stewards to plant cuttings for willow, and that was important. It was willow is a very good regrowing tree, as you know. We even could make fascines of willow, which is basically you just bundle them up together and dump them in the mud, and they will just sprout like crazy. When beavers chew willow, it actually copses so that it regrows itself. So regrowing a fast growing tree like willow is an easy thing to do. And that is certainly, you can also wrap the trees that you say you have an old cottonwood that you just can't bear to lose. You can wrap that tree with welded wire, and that will prevent the trees from being chewed and eaten. And again, that has to be done above the snow level. Like if your snow level, if you get a foot of snow, you have to do it 3 feet above the foot of snow. But about 3 feet of welded wire, not chicken wire, because beavers are way bigger than chickens. But that will solve your problem as well.
Probably several layers of wiring of some sort, right?
Well, not several layers. There, I mean, if you use welded wire, we have done this successfully. You're basically making a cage that doesn't touch the tree, that leaves a distance, and securing it to the ground so the beaver can't push the cage out of the way,
Mhm.
and that will solve your problem.
Excellent.
In fact, if you look at the depredation permits, one of the things that always amazed me is that the number one reason people in California would get a depredation permit from beavers was because of damage to trees or landscaping, and that is the easiest problem to solve. Putting in welded wire is a simple problem that a simple solution everyone could do, and we just don't do it enough.
So they were complaining about the trees that grew alongside the banks
Correct.
of these
In
creeks.
fact, in places like Placer County, which kills 1 billion beavers, that's one of the fastest growing counties in the state, right?
Right.
As they're putting in all this new development, then they have to recover some of the trees they're taking out. And what the construction companies tend to do is they put in those trees in creeks because nobody's living in the creek. They don't have to give up the space. They put in the creek, and then of course beavers take it out. So it's a very bad solution that kind of builds on itself.
So the trees actually have to be planted on the easement of the creeks or higher up.
Or higher up, or maybe not in the creeks at all. Some of these trees, if they're taking out trees from an area where they're going to put houses in, maybe they need to put some trees where the houses are. Some of the times you have to build property with trees and not compensate by making up just creek land.
So alders and willows, those are trees that are found quite often along the riparian corridors.
Correct. Yeah, and they are softwood that are very valuable to the beaver, and they regrow quickly. There are lots of ways to be able to replant them. You could replant them just with cuttings. So
Mm.
you just put a stick in the ground, and that really is a pretty amazing way to keep your tree line going, but also, you can fence off, let's say, a section of trees that you don't want beavers to mess with while they're growing up, and then give beavers access to another section. They also, they eat lots of other plants. They eat lilies, they eat lots of water tubers, they eat reeds, and this is a great way to keep them happy as well. They yank them out of the ground and they wash them off with their little hands, and they crunch them like carrots. So people really are surprised, but beavers don't totally rely on trees.
Yeah, Heidi, when you say the welded wire, is that like I heard something like hardware cloth? Is that the same?
No, what I mean is that like the wire that is Sorry, it's wire that is, I can show you a picture of it. It's called welded wire. It's like the fencing that's like square fencing.
Oh,
I'm
so
sure
it's
you,
like cyclone fencing?
not cyclone
No?
fencing. It's not, it doesn't need to be as strong as that. But it's the kind of fencing that you would put up to keep, I guess, your dog in the backyard. I think probably. Um, I I'll if you look up the word welded wire, it is just strong, way stronger than chicken wire. Chicken wire is just too easy to push. It's too easy to gnaw through.
The chicken wire doesn't seem to have much
No.
resistance. We have trouble even with gophers and chicken wire.
Right.
Yeesh.
So
Hmm.
yeah.
And then how are you doing, Heidi? Can you take a few more?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, okay. Anne is asking, well, first, awesome presentation. She says, but were you able to receive some of the state grant money? Will you come to other counties like Calaveras County to share your presentation? What do you think about introducing beavers in areas where dams are being removed?
Oh, well, I mean, I think you know, one of the people who attended our Beaver Summit was the CDF, the Fish and Game Officer from Calaveras County. So she's one of the people that really had her mind blown about beaver, and we're buds now. So she's very, very interested, and she would love to be involved in anything that goes forward. I know there are beavers in some parts of the Stanislaus River, so it's not like they aren't anywhere up that way. I actually have seen depredation permits from my own, so I know they are nearby Calaveras, but they will, yeah, they will find their way. Are we able to access any funding from CDFW? No, but we have been able to get county grants from our Fish and Wildlife Commission at the county level.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That helps. Anything helps, heavens. But so why is reintroduction so difficult? Do you need to have pairs of them? Like a
Oh,
male and
yeah,
a
well,
female?
that's a great question. Well, first of all, when you think about it, what we w- when you what we know is that when you reintroduce beavers, you have to do it as a family. So you have to catch everybody in the family and move everybody in the family to the new site. And that means you have to trap for a series of days and move for a series of days. And also you have to maintain those beavers in a place while you're waiting for them to go to the new place, and that usually there is some kind of quarantine period while you're trying to find out if they've got any diseases or anything. And the beavers, once you release them in the new habitat, there's no guarantee they're going to stay where you put them. Beavers have their own minds, and they like to make their own decisions. They are just like people. And so they may or may not stick around. You know, you can't staple them in and plan that they're going to be in your watershed. So we know from the research that has been done on beaver relocation for the last 20 years in the Methal Valley, for example, that beaver relocation is successful only about 60% of the time, even when it's done by the smartest people.
Hmm.
And if you're getting rid of beaver for using relocation, well, remember that vacancy sign. So you're putting a vacancy sign on the property where you just had these beavers taken out of, and some new beaver is going to move in. And it may not take 2 years, it may not take 6 months now that the population is rebounding. So I think we overestimate how valuable beaver relocation is. Beavers are complicated. It's a complicated fix to move them. And even though it can be a good tool for someplace that beavers will maybe never get back to because life has gotten so hard. For example, Marin really wants beavers. And it's just really hard for beavers to get out there because of the waterways or because of the highways. And so it may be useful to reintroduce beaver in the upper hills or the upper Sierras where they haven't been. But it's also really important to remember that it's a tool of limited value.
Mm. Best for them to try and find their own habitat as they leave the family and spread out to find a place of their own. Gradually, very slowly, they'll populate where they can, I suppose. That would probably be
Well,
optimal.
yeah, you because you get the fortune of me talking today, that is the message I'm going to leave you with. God, I totally believe that. I think beavers invite themselves into your life, and if you're smart enough to learn how to coexist, you are a lot better off, and beavers will come and go as they please.
And thank you. And did the Palo Alto Beavers, did they have any kids at all? Or
Theoretically, that female had a kit this year. I saw what I thought was a kit, and we do believe that's hanging out with its father now. We don't know. Not a tiny kit, but you know, it probably I saw it after it had been alive for 6 months. So it's perfectly survivable. It's not, you know, it's eating solid food and all of those things.
so it's there, it's living in Palo Alto and surviving.
Yes.
Oh, excellent. Well, that's
I
good.
haven't seen him. I haven't seen footage. Bill hasn't got footage again of that beaver gotten bigger, or I haven't seen him. But it's possible. Yeah.
Yes, and the bill that Heidi is referring to is none other than Bill Lycum, who gave us the fox. He's the fox, known as the fox guy, and he gave us the wonderful lecture on gray foxes recently. So
Right.
yeah,
Right. And I know Bill from the Beaver Festival because, you know, we would have the fox guy there and we'd have the otter person there and we'd have all of the different wildlife. And really, one of the things I wanted to do was to teach all of these different wildlife protectors why beavers matter to the species they're interested in, because if you care about keeping water and safe clean corridors on your land, then you care about beavers.
but you're talking about river otters.
Yes, I'm not talking about sea otters. What were you talking about, sea otters?
No, but I'm saying that there might be
Oh,
some confusion, but these are all river otters.
correct. You know what is so interesting when we were reading trapping records and stuff from historical information, they talked about sea otters. They called them sea beavers because in a certain part of trapping lore, in historic lore, a beaver is just an animal whose fur you want. So they called them sea beavers.
Hmm. Sea beavers. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. And well, do farmers have much to say in terms of beavers? I mean, those
Well, again, there are in the world, there are farmers who are getting the idea that that if you're a farmer, what you want more than anything else
there's
is
water.
water. And if you want a a watery landscape where water is available to you, then you're going to cooperate with beavers. And there are smart farmers out there that are getting the idea. There are ranchers, especially, who are getting the idea that you also want grass for your cows and your horses to forage. You can work to, let's say, fence off parts of your creek so your cows don't go in the creek and don't eat the baby little willow that sprout there. And then the beaver will come there, and then the beaver will maintain that creek, and then your cows have water to drink. And that is a really valuable tool that people are getting all across the West. We have a great, there's actually a great teaching webinar coming up about cattle and, excuse me, farmers specifically, and beavers.
Oh, well, that should be most illuminating for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're obviously they're not best friends. That it's sort
No.
of like I told you about the title of the article that the farmer in Oklahoma wrote, that was called "Beavers Are the Cure We Don't Want to Take."
Right.
I think is really the way that a lot of people are coming to this, going, really, isn't there some other way we could keep water and fight fires and keep all those fish on our land and not lose all the frogs? Isn't there some other way? But probably there isn't. And beavers are really a valuable tool.
And well, it seems as though the same antagonism is there with beavers as with wolves. The fact that you couldn't, farmers were,
Right.
so they were fighting tooth and nail, even though they were being compensated for their lost animals. In Yellowstone, the whole project was a very, very difficult project with
Very, very
the
difficult.
reintroduction, but they managed it. And again, it's a keystone species, the
Right.
wolf.
And I would love to see California incentivizing landowners for keeping beavers on their land.
Mhm.
They're valuable in so many ways to the state. And to be honest, the reason I came up with the word worth the dam, the name worth the dam, is because, I had thought about all these nice phrases like friends of beavers or whatever, but there was such a battle in Martinez, and there was such feisty toe-to-toe fighting over this, that worth a damn seemed to be the right term.
Well, it certainly hits the spot, I think. I mean, I see it seems to have worked very well and served the purpose.
Yeah.
So,
Well, yeah.
um, so I think we've established the fact that the beaver is a keystone species.
Correct.
And it reintroduces and brings with it a great many other species and makes things more biodiverse and more habitable and so on. So that answers somebody else's question. So I must
Right.
thank you. I don't want to keep you any longer. We've kept you as quite a time, and I'm sure you want to rest. So Heidi, thank you for a tremendous evening. I mean, truly, truly fascinating evening. And I'm sure Adrian and I and many others will be there for the Beaver Festival in Martinez in June.
Wonderful. Good. And the one thing I didn't say that I wanted to say, that I always say, is that beavers are the trickle-down economy that works.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe the only one.
Yeah.
So thank you and good night.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
Good night, and good night to everyone. And thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next month. Take care. Good night, all. I'll end the webinar.
All right.
Thank you so much, Heidi. That was
Thank you. That was fun.
truly stupendous. Truly. It's always so wonderful to have a speaker who can just speak about something with such love and understanding. And so simply that it just there are no barriers.
Second time you said simply. I'm terrified that I was too simple now.
No, but in a way that reaches people.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the scientists are out there and they forget that somehow just how to communicate.
Good.
And
Good.
so
Well,
you do it beautifully.
well, thank you so much. And I really enjoyed that. And that was fun. You guys are going to be happy if you come to the festival, I'm sure.
I'm sure it must run all day, but from what, 10 to 5, 10 to 6 usually?
Yeah, well, no, I probably, 10 to maybe, depending on how hot it is, 3 or 4.
10 to 3 or 10 to 4.
Yeah.
So lots of water. Okay, we'll bring lots of water with us.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Again,
Bye-bye.
take care. I'll be in touch in the next day or two.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Good night.
Okay, thank you. Good night.
Good night.